In order to make sort of progress on this front of international economic governance really requires us to address this issue of, the WTO's legitimacy because, as we focus more and more on the WTO's role in international economic governance, what we do is we focus more on its power. And, this essentially raises the question of, whether, the exercise by WTO of the power is acceptable, which is really a question of, the extent of its legitimacy. And in fact, in important ways, a failure to adequately address some of these legitimacy concerns that sort of came out of the Uruguay round and was reflected in the WTO text, has sort of come back to roost in a way in terms of some of the challenges we're seeing in the Doha round. For example, a sort of sense amongst developing countries that the Uruguay round was an unbalanced outcome, or unfair, sort of has played into, I think, the unwillingness of these countries, to make, the type of market access commitments, being sought of them, and it's really made it difficult as well for them to respond to developed countries' demands in this sense. The WTO in many respects has been alive to this legitimacy issue. For example, the appellate body in particular, through a variety of decisions has found, for instance, that there exists a range of, what would be called due process norms, which I think have gone, important, ways to addressing its legitimacy. And, the WTO Secretariat as well has, in its own way been alive to the issue. It's sought to increase the transparency of the WTO as well as the negotiating rounds. But, this issue of legitimacy is really an ongoing process and, I think importantly, requires members to sort of seriously engage with the issue and possibly think about, taking it up in some type of, cross-cutting sense when we start thinking about, what next for the WTO.